Good evening, my fellow citizens. This government, as promised, has maintained the closest surveillance of the Soviet military buildup on the island of Cuba. Within the past week, unmistakable evidence has established the fact that a series of offensive missile sites is now in preparation on that imprisoned island.
In his famed inaugural address, President John F. Kennedy once said, "Let us never negotiate out of fear, but let us never fear to negotiate." President Kennedy used this approach with great effect during the Cuban Missile Crisis of 1962. And it was during that crisis where the United States and the Soviet Union stood on the very precipice of nuclear war. It was only through the application of reason, patience, and an uncanny ability to see things and events through his opponent's eyes that President Kennedy successfully steered the United States from disaster. It was said that both the United States and the Soviet Union stood eyeball to eyeball, and the Soviet Union blinked during that crisis. Well, that might be true, but I prefer to think of it as President Kennedy applying clear-eyed reason, forbearance, and most of all, a rejection of simplistic militarism that got him and the rest of the country through the crisis. A major lesson coming from the Cuban Missile Crisis is that in order to reach a true diplomatic settlement, you need two to tango. And during the crisis, both President Kennedy and Soviet Premier Nikita Khrushchev were willing to put aside their differences and hammer out a compromise agreement. No one wins at all in any diplomatic argument. You have to compromise. And that's something future leaders should all be aware of, whether American or otherwise.